Hello, my name is Nicholas Mackay, and I'd like to talk to you in this session around how to create a coaching culture in your school as part of the Middle East Outstanding Schools Conference. So before we delve into some themes here, I'd like to sort of just give you a quick overview of who I am. I'm a professional certified coach with the International Coach Federation, and work with school leaders and schools all over the world around coaching, executive coaching and leadership development. I'm also an associate professor at the University of Warwick in the UK, former international school principal and author of Always Coaching, which frames some of the things I'm going to outline in this short session. So in terms of what I'd like to speak to you about, it's basically around three domains and their subdomains. And the domains are fundamental, systemic, and transformative. And each domain has a couple of subdomains. So for example, the fundamental domain has skills and then application. The systemic domain, individual, group, then team. And the transformative domain, dialogue, and then way of being. And this is a coaching evolution to create a coaching culture in your setting. So if we go through each domain one by one, let's look at the definition and then drill down a little bit into what the subdomains are. So in the fundamental domain, we're looking at a one-to-one conversation. And this is around the coach being non-directive in a traditional sense. So instead of a mentoring, we're very much at the non-directive coach end of the scale of the spectrum. We're facilitating the learning of others, and we're not teaching them to do things. We're actually giving them an appropriate challenge and a supportive and encouraging environment. So essentially it's their agenda, people that we're coaching, and they have all the answers. So in terms of the coaching fundamental domain, we're looking at skills and application. So the skills are framed around 7 different areas. So the bedrock really and the foundations are questioning and listening. Once we have those in place, we can look at more empathizing, acknowledging, paraphrasing and summarizing, clarifying, and then forwarding the action. So we have tangible things happening. In terms of the questioning and the listening, of course, we're looking at that intuitive listening, holding the space, so that the hands here just represent that holding of the space to allow dialogue to happen and to allow people to feel safe and secure in what they're talking about. In terms of questioning, again, very traditional fundamental ways of coaching, open-ended questioning, looking at scaling question from 1 to 10 and people sort of seeing where they resonate in relation to that. So for example, on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being the lesson was terrible, 10 being the lesson was the best ever, where do you currently sit? And then from then you can continue your work. In terms of empathizing, acknowledging, it's meeting people on a similar energy level. And then again, the clarifying till you fully understand what the person is speaking about and giving a steer to the conversations before we forward and propel things going forward. A typical fundamental coaching process is around this kind of model really, which is very, very relevant to schools in terms of development planning. So we identify the issue, whatever that is, then we set goals. Around those goals, we set a development or an action plan about how we're going to get to those goals, and then we act. So we put things into play and we see how it goes. We then monitor that and evaluate. If it's working well, success, fantastic. If not, then we have to go back to a different stage, whether it's action plan, a goal or an issue, and see, do we have to change what's working? Have we got the right issue? Have we come to the right goal? Is the development plan relevant and fit for purpose, etc.? So it's a very linear process which can work well in context, and especially when time is scarce and we're looking at scaling and coaching understanding across an institution. In terms of an application, which is the second subdomain, that is based around a model. Now, in coaching, sometimes in education, we're very quick to get to the model without actually understanding the skills. Now, a model is a model. Without the skills, it's useless. So it doesn't matter what model you choose. And I've got an example here of the CLEAR model, which I think is really, really good because it has the contracting and the review. So we have the contracting, which is a really underused element of coaching, especially in education, I find, is having that those desired outcomes, the ground rules, how it's going to work, the location, where we're going to meet, how we're going to be challenged, is it confidential, how long is this assignment going on for? How would you like to be coached? And then the listening, of course, so making sure that we're just not listening in a subjective and objective way, but we have that intuitive sense. So we're listening for who the person is rather than what they're saying all the time. Then we're exploring, we're jostling with ideas, and that's very much can be a messy time because we want to help the person understand the impact of the decisions and also looking at future action and possibilities. So again, just a reminder, in the fundamental domain, that is the coachee's agenda, the person that you're working with. Then we land on the action. So that's supporting the person you're working with to decide next steps, a way forward, and being really sharp and clear around that. So by when is it going to happen? What's going to possibly stop you from getting that done? What time will you speak to that person, etc. And then finally, the review, which I really like as well. And this is around just closing the session and seeing, what worked well, even better if, to coin teaching phrases. So, did I challenge you enough there? What did you find useful? What can I have done more of? What can I have done less of? And that really informs future relationships and future coaching sessions. So to summarize the fundamental domain, it's one-to-one. We're looking at skills first and then models-based. So input and output process, essentially. The onus on you as a coach to master the 7 coaching skills. We're looking at a non-directive approach. So the person you're working with has the answers, you frame that. And the focus is on goal setting and finding solutions to problems. So if we continue our journey through this coaching evolution, we come to the next domain, which is, I call it the systemic domain. And that is made up of 3 subdomains: the individual, the group, and then the team. And in the systemic domain, we recognize that learning and development happens not just within us and with the individual, but in a dynamic engagement with the systems that we're part of. So we're starting to understand the patterns of relationships and communication in a school or in an organization. And that has an impact on us. So the culture and the way that things are done in the school have an impact on the way that we turn up and operate, essentially. So in terms of the systemic domain, we need to have an understanding of the systems at play. And in most schools, we have obviously the leadership, whether that's senior leadership, that could be the head principal, middle leadership, etc. We also have the students and the teachers. It's also really important to recognize a non-teaching staff and also the community. So parents, as an example, maybe, the governance around that, etc. So once we know the systems at play, we can then start to use those to coach. So if we're looking at a wider, broader reach, we're not just coaching the teachers, because the teachers will have an impact with the students, with the non-teaching staff, with the community, with the leadership. If we're coaching school leaders, they obviously have an impact with the teachers and maybe the parents and non-teaching staff and the students of all levels. So we're looking at how things play out in terms of systems here. In terms of the individual, the subdomain, I find mapping is really, really beneficial. So when I work with heads, CEOs, senior leaders, we do a lot of mapping to sort of see where the current reality and the current context is. So in this example here, the little player that says number 1 is their principal, and they place themselves on this mat, which is the school system. You can see the white arrow there on the mat, which shows that the school has an upward trajectory and is improving. And then the principal placed other people. So number 2 on this mat is the deputy, and they placed them a little bit underneath them in the hierarchical sense, but their trajectory with a little arrow on the 2 is upward. And then they place the assistant heads and how they resonate and how close they are to the principal and how close they are to each other, representing relationships. And that can start to really craft an understanding of the players in a system and also their relationship and how those players are interacting with each other. If we're looking at the group coaching, which is the next subdomain in the systemic domain, we're looking at action learning. So as you can see on this diagram here, this is perfect for people who are working together, who haven't got a shared purpose, but are working in the same context. So for example, heads of department, phase leaders. So they've all got a similar job, but no shared purpose to produce something. So the way this works is, say, in an action in a set of 6 people, so 6 head of departments for this example, you have a start with the lead person. They come and they present a challenge or a problem in their role. Then the other people in that set, the other 5 people, would start to listen, engage the fundamental coaching skills, paraphrasing, summarizing, listening especially, and then start to coach that person around this challenge or issue. The lead person then will provide feedback to the group around the new options and land on a goal or an action plan, a development plan. They then go back into their setting, try it out, and then find out what works, what hasn't worked, complexities, etc. And then they come back to the set, and then they draw conclusions collectively from that. And then in the next meeting, the next round, you change the lead person. So what you're effectively doing is you're cementing that organizational knowledge. You're really developing that coaching skills. You're developing and sharing expertise in a group setting. Finally, in the last subdomain, we have team coaching. And this is around working with people who have a shared identity and purpose. So for example, a senior leadership team. So they are responsible for the mission, the vision of the school, for the results, these kind of things. And what I find works really well is through team coaching is looking at 6 lenses. And that's the individual, interpersonal, team tasks, and the objectives around that. Team relationships, the interfaces between different stakeholders and the wider context. And you can use each of these lenses to unpick how the team works with each other and the impact it has and their connectivity with other people that they come into contact with. And what I find when I'm working with senior teams in education is we don't spend enough time talking about how we're working together. There's always a very packed agenda, there's lots of action points, but we don't actually look at how we're interacting and how we want and how we contract, how we're going to be working together over a period of time, how we influence different stakeholders. So that's a really interesting piece of facilitating team coaching and team development. So just again, a summary of the systemic domain. We're looking at 3 subdomains: the individual with a broader reach, the group and team settings. It's a much more of a broader perspective, and we're looking at different dynamics at play in the organization and schools. Lots of different stakeholders involved and how we interact with them. We're looking at mapping, action learning in a group sense, and also team coaching. Finally, we have the transformative domain. And this is around dialogue and way of being as subdomains. And I would call this a skillful dialogic partnership. So in terms of how this sits, say, in directive and non-directive mentoring coaching, those lines now are a little bit more blurred. You know, maybe we're looking at the fallacy of being non-directive. Can we really ever be non-directive in nature? We have all this unbiased conscious and unconscious bias, and things, you know, at play. So really, this is about working in whatever aspect we are, individual, group, team, but having that co-created partnership. So maybe as a coach, you can put some of your own expertise into this. It's not purely non-directive. And dialogue sits at the heart of the transformative domain. So maybe after we've got the fundamental domain, the coaching skills, we're using maybe some models across your setting. Then you've got the systemic coaching with the groups and the teams going on. We can start to flatten some of those and focus purely on dialogue. Dialogue really is different to conversation. Conversation, you kind of know what the outcome is going to be. With dialogue, maybe you go into that interaction and you don't know the outcome. So it's a little bit more nuanced and unstructured. And a lovely way to look at this is called the space between. And this is around what we know as people and where the world is. And that space between us and the world, where we can jostle with ideas. We can be creative. We can think about things in a collective sense that maybe we haven't considered individually. And creating effective dialogue, you need that psychological safety. So you need that really robust holding. And you can do this through 5 ways. You evoke the ideal. So you really ensure that something new and exciting is going to emerge from the interaction. So maybe you don't have an agenda at all. You don't have any targets. This is about what comes from that dialogue. You support dreaming out loud, so you create that space where people can feel that they can give contributions without harming someone's feelings, without changing a hierarchical dynamic. Deep listening again, so we're really leveraging those fundamental coaching skills around listening to ensure people have the opportunity to communicate. Making it safe for opposers, again, very much like psychological safety here. So we can give counter arguments, we can engage critically, and it's not personal. And also dare to suspend. So, it's not about defending your own corner. We're open to new possibilities and perspectives. And if we have this effective dialogue in place, we can really see that schools and improvement can fly. So if to summarize some of this, we have a way of doing and a way of being. In the fundamental domain, we're starting to get used to coaching. So that's a way of being. So a way of doing is low, but a way of being low is quite low as well, because we haven't got the identity of coaching. As we transition into the systemic domain, we get more skilled at coaching. So our way of doing, our way of coaching improves, but also our way of being improves. We're more confident coaching. We know how it works in different settings. And finally, the fundamental and systemic are the apprenticeship to the transformative domain, where our skills and our expertise in coaching is more nuanced, and we have a higher way of being, a higher identity, a more resonant identity of how we coach. So a little overview, again, the transformative domain, 2 subdomains, dialogue, and then transitioning to the way of being. It's about making the conditions conducive to dialogue. So it's more less advocacy, more inquiry. We're looking at accessing that space between and defining and developing your coaching presence. So how does this all look when we put it together? Well, I would argue that to get a coaching culture, we need to be activating each domain through all the stakeholders. So I wouldn't think that a one-to-one coaching relationship in silo is a coaching culture. I would want to be seeing the fundamental domain being activated, maybe through appraisal, performance development meetings, these kind of dialogues. Maybe you're using coaching models, maybe students are using coaching models, maybe parents are using coaching models. And then the systemic domain, I'd want to be seeing how much group coaching is going on, how much team facilitation is going on, what's coming out of that. And again, that's not just with teachers, that's involving non-teaching staff. That's involving students and community. Are governors having those conversations as well? And are they really looking at how they're developing as a team? And the transformative domain is how we're really creating the conditions for dialogue across all different stakeholders. And it's very contextual. So each school obviously would have different issues and challenges. But if you can use this as a blueprint to look at how you can resonate in each of those domains through the stakeholders, then you can start to really fly with a coaching culture. I would like to see this, and I think this is happening as well, going further. So rather than looking at one school, we're looking at a coaching union. So that could be part of a multi-academy trust, that could be part of a school membership, a school group, where we're starting to connect things together. So for example, is there coaching going on across schools with leadership? Are the parents groups connecting across different schools? Are students connecting, doing group sets maybe on revision techniques? Are senior leaders looking at team coaching across different schools? And then I think finally, we look at joining across regions and across nationalities and how far we can take this. So in terms of some more information, you can have a look at my book, Always Coaching, How to Create a Coaching Culture in Your School, which is available on Amazon. And that takes you through, in part 1, what I just outlined in more depth. So how to create a coaching culture in your school through those 3 domains. In part 2, I look at a coaching way of teaching. So that's how we can use those 3 domains in relation to building on teaching. And then in part 3, I look at those 3 domains with a coaching way of leading, looking at things like awareness, relationships, and agility. If you'd like to get in touch to ask any questions in relation to coaching and how you build coaching cultures, or any of the things that I discussed, please get in touch. It'll be great to hear from you. And I'll answer any questions that you can, or that you have, or that I can answer for you. So thank you for listening, and I hope you have a fantastic rest of your conference.